Welcome to this episode of Level with Emily Reese. This episode does feature a conversation with composer, instrumentalist, vocalist, poet, radio host Meena Shamaly. Meena has a lot of credits to his name. He does have his finger in a lot of pies, which is really fantastic. And we talk about basically three main aspects in this chat. First, we start off talking about Meena's work with Christopher Tin on the soundtrack for the game Old World. Meena served as a consultant on the game on the soundtrack to help Christopher with various aspects of Arabic music, also Arabic pronunciation for the choirs that sang on the Old World soundtrack. And Meena sings and performs. He plays an instrument called the oud on the soundtrack. So he worked with Christopher on many different aspects of that music. And so we start off talking about that. Secondly, we talk about Meena's radio show. He hosts a radio show in Australia. It airs on Fridays. It's called Game Show. And he picks a theme and plays an hour's worth of video game music and chats about it too. And as I said, that airs on Fridays in Australia on their ABC. And so it's fun to talk to him about that aspect of his life. And then the third topic we cover is performance poetry, or spoken word poetry, which has been a part of Meena's life for many years now as well. And so it was fun to hear his thoughts about spoken word poetry and learn a little bit more about that. Let's see. Join us on Discord. The link for the Discord server is in our show notes. You don't have to be a patron to join us on Discord. We do have a patron-only channel, but it is not imperative. Although if you do have the financial means to become a patron, that would be fantastic. We could really use your support. So find us on Patreon at patreon.com/level. That link also down in the show notes. I'm forgetting something else. At the beginning of this interview, I say something about how Meena says something about get on the horn. And we kind of joke about that phrase, and I kind of pontificate that it's American because I was assuming that it was maybe from the telephone days, but it's not. It's from like ships and boats and sailing and all that. So it's probably British, but anyway, forgive me that assumption. And let's see, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I hate doing these things scripted and I hate jump cuts. So that's why you get this babbling in between. In any event, let's just go to the conversation with Meena. He starts off explaining how he ended up working with Christopher Tin on the Old World music.
So here's the story. I get a tag on Facebook. Someone's tagged my name, and what it was Christopher Tin had posted, hey, I need someone who does Middle Eastern vocals. And this composer that I know that has heard my work said, Meena Shamaly, fantastic, within like 5 minutes. Wow. Cool. Oh my God, it's Christopher Tin asking. Okay, don't freak out. This guy's amazing. Wow. And, we'd been playing his music, loved his music for many, many years. So, like... To think that there's a possibility I might work with him was just surreal. Yeah. And I got in contact with him, sent him a message, sent him an email. He's like, yeah, cool. Let's talk about it. And he'd sent an email about I need some Middle Eastern performers for this very Middle Eastern based score. But also, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to, have a consultation session where I can, or just be a consultant, where I can ask you a whole bunch of questions about Middle Eastern music, and the things that I can't Google, basically. Because when there are linguistic barriers as well, and some things aren't well documented in English, you can't just Google it and approximate, I think these letters written backwards might mean Dorian. It just won't work that way.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously there's translations and everything, but you wouldn't even know where to look. Sure, it's just a vast world. So I was like, I can, absolutely. We got on the horn. I keep using that term, we got on the horn, and then some people are like, what are you talking about?
No, that's a good one. I think that's very American. I could be wrong, but
I don't know.
I don't know either.
We we got on the horn and we had this wonderful 3-hour session just talking Middle Eastern music.
Neat.
And all the things that, because he had some limited experience, but he was really just exploring it. And we started talking. He's like, okay, if I did this, is that silly or is that interesting?
Yeah.
And the crux of it that I found through the conversation is like, whatever you bring to it is going to be fantastic because your intention has already been shining through. Like your intention isn't to exoticize Middle Eastern music, which happens a lot. And the thing is, I personally don't necessarily have an issue with people, mixing in Middle Eastern things or things from other cultures. It's the way it's done, because sometimes I'll listen to something and there's a response. They're like, that was a bit cheesy.
Yeah.
It's just, at the very least, it's creatively uninteresting.
Right.
It's so it's going the steps beyond, hey, here's a harmonic minor, so we were Middle Eastern, we're done.
Yeah.
But we were also speaking about this Arabic suite specifically was a focal point, which is the last 4 tracks of the album. These 4-movement suite that the game's director, Layla Johnson, who's of Lebanese origin, and it was her impetus to work with Chris because they'd worked together before on Civilization and Off-World Trading Company, and she said, if I wanted a fully authentic Middle Eastern score, I would have hired a Middle Eastern composer, but that's not what the game was looking for.
Sure. Yeah.
The game is a mix of things with a focus on the Middle Eastern culture. So we ended up just chatting about all these things and modes and kind of ideas that he's like, I came across this idea. Is that what it is? And we can elaborate on concepts in Middle Eastern music. But then also we were talking about what I would do, which was provide some vocals, provide some ouds, and because there are a lot of improvisatory elements in Middle Eastern music, there's still some solid things. The same way you'd have maybe a jazz tune with here's the melody and then here's half an hour of improv, which can happen a lot. So here's the crux of it. So we were talking about how we would work with that, and I was like, look, I'm gonna just improvise a few things, send them your way, and then you work with them. Because as a composer, I like to work that way. I like to, when I'm working with a session musician, I'm interested in what they have to bring, and especially if they're bringing a different cultural focus. I like to see their practice, their relationship with culture, and then bring it in. I could give them a key, I could give them a tempo, or I could let them freehand it. But I love hearing people just cut loose and do something that I could never conceive of because my mind isn't even across that at that point. So once they bring it to the table, I'm like, oh yeah. Okay, this is making sense. And now I have to make sure that I as a composer am matching them and matching what the amazing thing they've brought. So I have no problem. I get asked to improvise things all the time. I'll improvise things and see what you want to do with it. And it was really wonderful to then hear the results of what Chris did. It's like, here's some things, and he sends me back the tracks he wrote, and I was like, whoa. I'm sitting there insecure about how I've performed and everything, and you've just taken it to a whole other level. It was quite an incredible process.
I bet.
And I did, and also because at that time, sorry, tangents on tangents on tangents.
No, please continue. Go on.
One of the other instrumentalists on the track, Camille Ferrari, is a friend of mine who was also an expert in Middle Eastern music tradition and history.
Okay.
He also came from a background of doing electronic music, so he was doing the thing of completely innovating on the art form while still understanding its roots. And I was like, oh, you need to meet Camille. So we introduced him to Camille, and they had conversations of their own as well. And he ended up playing 2 instruments, the qanun and the ney, on the track right after me in the album.
Okay.
which we recorded in the studio, which was fantastic.
Oh, neat. Okay.
So it was really fun for him to be able to have his part of the process, and all the different people that Chris had collaborated with, like Lael Watfe in the final track, and then Abir Name in the original the title track, or the first track of the album, I Lift My Eyes. And even then, when we had our consultation, Chris and I, he hadn't settled on the text. He and Layla hadn't settled on the text yet. So we were even talking about that. And he even said, oh, what's the text, this thing called the qasida, which is just the Arabic word for poem.
Okay.
You know?
Okay.
It's things like that. I always find it funny when they go, oh, they go to a school called the madrasa. It's like, madrasa just means school. It's just they went to school.
Just means
the school isn't just called a madrasa. It's just a school. It's not even a formal word. I don't know where you're getting this from. So that's the kind of thing that I just find really funny sometimes is when some words that are just super ordinary everyday words get given this like heightened importance because you don't necessarily know what that means.
Yeah. Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah. So that's been fun.
I mean, tell me a little bit about your background then. You speak Arabic fluently, is that?
That is correct. It's I learned Arabic and English concurrently. So just growing up. Okay. And French, but then that kind of dropped off a while ago.
Okay. But where did you grow up then? Because it does not sound like you grew up in Australia, that you learned Australian English, you know what I mean?
So I was born in Alexandria in Egypt, to an Egyptian mom and a father of Lebanese background, but who'd also lived in Egypt.
Okay.
But so I had a strong connection to both the Lebanese and the Egyptian side, just from my families.
Yeah.
And immediately my parents moved to Dubai. Like I was just nothing years old, so it was like we moved to Dubai. Moved to Dubai. So I spent the first 15 years of my life in Dubai in the UAE.
Oh, wow.
So to me, I was already on a land that wasn't mine. I was already an immigrant the moment I knew how to speak.
Sure.
And so already I felt like I wasn't from there, but it was home. Which is just a weird, and being Middle Eastern is like, we're all Middle Eastern, but you're a different kind of Middle Eastern, so you're not really from here. And then when we'd go to visit Egypt, it's like, you're not the Egyptian that lives in Egypt, so you're not really from here. I still haven't been to Lebanon at this point, as of recording.
Okay.
But I want to. I really want to.
Yeah, I'd love to.
And then we came to Australia in 2002. The whole family migrated to Australia. So I've been here for 20 years.
Okay.
And but it's I think someone pointed it out recently in terms of my accent, is that the words you say sound American, but your speech patterns are more Australian.
Okay, yeah.
And that's where I recognize, oh my God, that's why I don't actually sound like a real American person of any persuasion. It's like, or of any accent, like, I don't know, maybe there's one state where someone speaks exactly like me, but I don't know.
No, I mean, that's just amazing. When you think about, home, I mean, for me, I didn't grow up in this city, but this is home now. But I mean, I also have a different home, right? So when you, what do you think of? Do you feel that way about, like, personally, regardless of what other people think, do you feel that way about Egypt or Dubai or both, or?
I think because Dubai is where the first memory I have is the years of Dubai. I think of Dubai as home. Although now, 20 years removed from it, it probably is almost unrecognizable, because even the UAE as a whole has just kind of advanced beyond it. And the interesting thing is, my dad was an engineer back there, and so he participated in a lot of the projects that changed the face of Dubai.
Yeah.
I'm not saying like he single-handedly did it, but he was part of those projects.
Sure.
So even
like
the
making
Burj
the
Khalifa,
islands and things like that, and
I think the islands were after we left, or they were,
I mean, that's
they were completed after. Yeah,
sure.
But he was part of the Burj Khalifa, for example.
Okay.
so that was just like really interesting. It's like, oh, his company was working on that and he was project managing. And I was like, wow, okay, so I can look at that and be like, that is a mark of my family. Like, no one cares about, but I can look at it and be like,
yeah, no, that's amazing. That's huge. That's very cool to have that connection to such a famous spot,
but like it's weird because it's like, it is weird because I feel like I can say it and it would sound like a cool fact, but I don't know what it means now. It just but I think the home that I long for is Lebanon, because I feel like I grew up with the Lebanese side of my family and Lebanese friends and connected to that, but always through screens and through secondhand experience. But I'd love to go to Lebanon and really actually feel what it's like to walk on the lands that, like, my great grandparents would have walked on. So Egypt, I think I have an interesting relationship with, because it's like ever present. So ever present in the background being like the diaspora, and it's the stronger focus in my family. But I'm not sure, like, I've always had, like, it makes me feel, sometimes I'm like, oh, I miss going there. Sometimes like, I don't want to go there. And it's just, and it's like you have a lot of family there, and like everyone kind of makes a pilgrimage to Egypt at some point. I sometimes I miss it, sometimes I don't, but that's because it's there all the time. Which is, I don't know what that says about me. But and being in Australia, that's the same maybe with Australia. Like, if I left Australia for 10 years, maybe like, oh, I miss Australia. But I feel like here's where I became an adult.
In
Australia is where I became an adult. And so that's a very different experience.
It is.
Yeah, because I only grew up till I was 15 in Dubai. So when people say, oh, what's better? Like, if I want to, like, hang out, would I go to Dubai or would I go to Melbourne? I'm like, well, I was a kid. I was a child. I don't know what the night spots are. So I can't tell you. I will be having your same experience if we visit Dubai now. Like, I will be an adult going to Dubai for the first time in this context. This is not...
Amazing.
So,
Well, let's get back to the music part then, because Middle Eastern music, Arabic music, it's completely different than Western music in many ways. Obviously, commonalities abound between all musics, but scales, harmony, singing style, and that's what I love the most about. Well, tonality too. I love the harmonies. So I'm a big fan of Arabic music, but the singing it's so special, and I love melismas. It's like one of my favorite things, and that's one of the things that drew me to chant, Byzantine, Gregorian, all the chant styles when, way back in the day. And it's what draws me to Arabic music. So talk about that if you would, and how you learned, because I imagine there was training involved in that, or I don't know. I'd love to just know your musical path there.
So it's interesting you say training, because yes and no.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't formally trained in music until I went to university.
Okay.
And even though I was studying to be a composer, so I was never kind of like trained as a vocalist.
Okay.
But so I grew up as I come from the Coptic Orthodox Church, and that's kind of like, I grew up in the church and singing Coptic Orthodox chants that are kind of like imagine an offshoot of Greek Orthodox chants.
Sure.
Or Byzantine chants, but like a more Middle Eastern version of it.
Okay, yeah.
So and a lot of melismas, like you can literally say 5 minutes on one vowel. So the idea of a melisma and how you play with that vowel, like just technically speaking, beyond the spirituality of it, it's just something like I grew up with it.
Yeah.
And I grew up with this idea of quarter tones and Middle Eastern tuning systems that were inherent to the language of Orthodox tunes or these chants. So I always that was never strange to me, Like I was never having to learn, oh, this weird tune note is like, where is it? I had to learn where it is on a piano because that it wasn't on a piano.
Right.
And then when I first heard about a quarter tone piano, I'm like, that's interesting. And I was like, oh, you're exploring this in a very different way. This has nothing to do with Middle Eastern music. Okay, gotcha. There's a quarter tone between every note. Okay, I gotcha. This is like completely like devoid of this cultural outlook, which isn't a bad thing. I'm just saying as a realization.
No. Yep. Yeah.
So I just grew up singing in church, and it's funny because that phrase means a lot of things to a lot of people, but singing in phrase means singing in these melismatic chants in Middle Eastern tunings. And at the same time, listening to Middle Eastern music, Middle Eastern pop music, is kind of like was my background. But then you'd hear some classical Arabic, it's like, whoa, that's like even to someone who was like listening to a lot of Middle Eastern pop music, the classical Arabic music where it could be an hour-long song, basically, because it's like a symphony, basically. It's like a vocal symphony, which I came to understand much later. But it's just like, it had a lot of similar things where you'd have a mawal, which is that vocal improvisation, that's kind of rubato, that's kind of arrhythmic, or not strictly continuous and regular.
Sure.
But it's like, wow, just like, the famous kind of voices like Kulthum, and then also like there's a lot of other classical Arabic singers that are worth listening to, like Sabah Fakhri, and then like there's Muhammad Abdul Wahab, who's like one of the great songwriters, and then the older ones of Sayyid Darwish, like the ones who, and then even some traditional songs that some even originated outside of the Middle East, outside of like Arab countries. It's like songs like Ish Gidara Gider Iken, the Turkish song, which I think Eartha Kitt sang at one point.
Oh, neat.
And it's originally a Turkish song, but I grew up with it in the church. There's a version of it in the church, and then there's a Syrian version, there's a Lebanese version, there's an Egyptian version, there's an Islamic version, and there's a Bulgarian version. And it's one of those melodies and then I heard it in the soundtrack of Civilization 6 as the Arabia theme. I was like, okay, so this is really cool. So there's all these kind of different sources that were in the back of my head. Around it, and you just absorb different things. So even now, I never claim to be an expert. I say I know what I know based on multiple things, based on lived experience. But I'm always still learning what these things about my own culture are, and even during the process of Old World, I was learning some things. In a sense, like things were snapping into focus.
Sure.
You learn something and you're like, it's that thing, but versus learning it entirely from scratch. And I think that's the difference. It's like when you're trained to be a doctor, you doesn't necessarily mean you know everything all the time. It just means that when you're presented with a new problem, you have the skills to say, for something to snap into focus, it could be that, even if you're not sure. And I think that's kind of where that experience comes in. Is I'm not here to say I'm the authority of Middle Eastern music and you're going to listen to me. It's like if there's one thing that we can arrive at together, it can snap into focus, and I can assure you that that's a really, really interesting idea in the wider context of things that I know.
Well, it really is. It's almost like you read my mind, because one of my questions was going to be like, who are some artists that you would recommend that someone like I listen to, or someone who's never listened to any Middle Eastern music or explored that world at all? And so I'm glad you listed those names, and I would be so grateful if you would type that list out. That'd be amazing.
Yes, absolutely.
And then we can put some playlists together or something like that, because it's so fabulous. So you also play oud though. So, and you also said something like, sorry, there's a little spider on my computer. You said something. Nice. We actually have little spiders here, unlike you guys.
No wonder Spider-Man is a fantasy in your world.
Yeah, exactly. It was funny. Someone like got kind of offended at me once. This is talk about a tangent for making a joke because another Australian composer I know had posted a picture of some spider he had killed in his kitchen or something, and it was, the size of a football helmet or something like that.
Oh my god!
And it probably wasn't that big, but it was big, and I was like, man, I just could never visit your country. And this other person wrote back, and they're like, well, here's a whole list of poisonous animals in the United States of America. And I didn't say anything back to him, but I wanted to say, listen, I live in Minnesota, buddy. We don't have any of that shit here. None of it. Like, we do not have any of that here. So it's like there are places in the country where you can find black widows and all the things. But yeah, I just got a big kick out of that. So spider tangent. Anyhow,
I mean, I am wearing a Spider-Man shirt, so
it's true. It is. I love it. And one of my favorite stories out of Australia happened during the pandemic. I read an article about a man who that his neighbors called thinking there was a domestic going on, but he was shooting his gun at a spider.
Wow.
Or screaming at it or something. I can't remember what.
Oh my god, I remember that actually.
Do you? Yeah, I'm telling you, it was like international news. It's like hilarious.
Oh my god.
Anyhow, that would have been me. So back to oud. I noticed that you said you said ouds. So that made me very curious.
Did I? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know if you had more than one oud or if
I do, but
okay. Maybe you're But in any event, talk about the oud because it's a beautiful, strummed lute-like instrument, so guitar-ish. But just talk to us a little bit about it and what makes it special because it has some really beautiful properties to it.
So for me, I grew up, I just don't know a time in my life where I did not know what an oud is.
Sure,
Well, I'm going to say ouds. I'm going to say it in its original ouds, which is a letter that doesn't exist in English. I'm very aware of that.
Okay.
But I want to be an ambassador for hearing it pronounced as oud as much as possible.
So tell me how to pronounce it. Tell me again. Let me put on my other earphone. Hang on. Yeah.
So ouds.
Arood.
So the letter, the way I explain it, and it's funny because this factors back into Old World in a way, and I'll tell you in a moment why.
Yeah.
When someone does an impression of Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yes.
You know that noise they make.
Yeah.
That's the letter. See, it's the back of your throat.
Ouds.
Oud. There it is.
See, and I can tell now why I thought you put an S on the end because the D is a little softer. Right?
Yes.
It's like, yeah. So I thought you had an S on it, but you didn't. You're just pronouncing it properly, which is awesome.
And so the reason I say this links into Old World is because one of the things Chris asked me to do was create a little vocal guide track and pronunciation guide for the choir for the first track. Because it was the Angel City Chorale, and none of them speak Arabic, but they were having to sing Arabic lines.
Mm-hmm.
So I literally made this pronunciation guide. It's like, okay, do an impression of Arnold Schwarzenegger and do that for this phrase. Okay, and then like here's your diphthong. Here's no diphthong. Here's like, I got into like minute detail to kind of like just to provide context. In the end, if they only heard it and just did an impression, it would have been fine. But it's like, let me give you the story behind the story because I think you will appreciate knowing that.
Yes.
For the pronunciation.
Yes.
Anyway.
So back to the instrument. Yes.
Oud.
Yes.
Yeah, so there was never a time in my life I didn't know what it was. And I'd always kind of craved to play it, but I never had one. I don't think I knew that I craved to play it until I got my hands on one. And when I started playing keyboards and then I started playing guitars, like I was like, I had the interest to be like, oh, I saw someone play guitar. I'm like, I think I want to play the guitar. And then play guitar for a few years. And then, I don't know, 10 years into that journey, I was like, okay, I think I want to try the oud. Because I was at a friend's place and they had oud, so I started playing it. And I'm like, ooh, this feels nice and feels a little natural as a guitarist. Cool, I'll try the oud. And I started playing it. And like immediately found like, oh, this is very difficult because there are no frets, and you got to kind of so your intonation needs to be spot on. But even today, I kind of I'll pick it up, and I always have that little thing of like, I'm not confident with this. I'm not like I'm definitely not a virtuoso. I can do it. I can do it enough to fool people.
Yeah, nice.
But immediately as I started playing it, and I started kind of like bringing it out to gigs and to poetry gigs, so I started playing it with poets.
Oh, cool.
And then one of at the time I was working on two poet friends. Each of them was releasing an album around the same time, and I was working on both their albums. And one of them asked me to play a oud for a piece of his that talks about ancient Greece. His background is Greek, but he thought it would be cool to have a oud for his piece about ancient Greece, which was amazing.
Yeah.
So I had a really cool way of recording that and just doing my own improvs and responding to his poetry. And then within that same year, I'd started meeting other composers who were doing media music, and because there's people who think screen music is all Hans Zimmer and John Williams and like 5 other people, and that's it.
Yeah.
But then there's like a plethora of other people who are doing other things that everyone's heard of, but they don't necessarily know who they are. And then there are people who are working full time in a variety of other roles. And I started meeting multiple levels of people. And through one of the groups that I joined, that I was invited to join, someone was talking about the oud, or talking about Middle Eastern instruments. It's like, well, I can record some. And I had someone else reach out to me, who was... This is kind of funny because he reached out to me to play for his soundtrack and just do a little improv and then do some rhythmic stuff. The game soundtrack he was doing ended up being like maybe one of the game itself. The game soundtrack was fantastic because he's a great composer.
Yeah.
But the game itself was probably one of the worst rated ever.
Oh no.
And I don't even know if I'm going to say what it is, but
You don't have to. It's okay. Yeah.
I think that I want to talk about it, but I think I want to get his blessing first to talk about it.
Yeah.
I don't think it makes any sense because this person now works with Hans Zimmer. So it's like, and he worked with him on Dune and No Time to Die. So this is going to be like a funny story for him. But it was really cool. It was just like, that was the first time I'd played oud on a soundtrack.
Neat.
And it was surreal to hear it, to see footage of the game, and then there was this cut scene where you just hear the oud exposed.
Oh,
I was
neat.
like, whoa.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay, that's really kind of, I'm out there. And and then I just kept, anytime, and that's also when I started talking about offering my voice as a recording session artist, because I didn't realize this path could be possible because I had resigned. Even resigned isn't the right word, but I had thought in my mind, I want to be a composer. I never thought about being a session musician. I want to be a composer or a songwriter or those kinds of things. And I never thought about the path of being a session musician as part of it, but then just kept, every now and then I'd get someone looking for a Middle Eastern vocal or an oud, and I'm like, okay, I'll record some.
Yeah.
And here we are. And now I'm like, okay, cool. I can actually say I've done this a few times.
Yeah.
And I think especially after Old World, like before Old World, I had done projects that I was proud of, but Old World was like, okay, like if someone asks for a demo, I'll just send them Old Worlds.
Yeah.
It's a great thing to be able to say, I worked with one of the best in the business. It's just it's surreal. I'm like,
Yeah.
So, and when he kind of ends up saying, oh, thanks for your musicality and your virtuosity, I'm like, what the heck are you talking about? This is amazing. And it's funny because like at this point I consider Chris a friend, but in a weird way I'm still starstruck by him. And it's the same. I think it's the same with a lot of composers. It's like if you respect their work and really appreciate their work, it's really hard to wrap your head around them becoming a version of a peer. You
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
It's like,
for sure.
well, yeah, we kind of do similar things. We're in the same industry. Maybe your budgets are bigger. Maybe that's why I respect you. I don't know. I'm not, no, but like,
Yeah.
I don't want to fall into that trap because composers are people and we're people and we're
Yeah, I mean, but I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Definitely know what you mean. Let's talk
I'm fairly
about.
sure you're going to need to edit like half of that off.
No.
Half of these-
No, it's all good. It's all good. But I do want to talk about the radio show because, I mean, first off, pro tip: if you search "game show ABC," you're going.
I know.
And you live in the U.S., especially because ABC here means something different. So I just search it with your name, which then immediately it comes up because ABC.
Even if you search the word classic, it'll be like ABC brings back a classic game show.
Yeah, right. No, exactly. Because I think I put in I did put one word in, and I was like, well, that's not going to help at all. Just put his name in.
The name wasn't my idea.
So,
the name wasn't my idea.
The name is great. Like it's just a common. That's what you want is something memorable, and So I totally get that. It's just funny, but it's a great name, and one of my favorite things about the show is how you theme each episode, and that's something I always find to be very difficult to come up with a theme. So I just would love to hear your thoughts. First of all, when did you start the show? And just talk about that. I love it. Go ahead. Sure.
So the first episode of the show aired in early 2018.
Okay.
And before that, I had so it's a funny thing because it's through my interests in video game music and then through my performance poetry that I felt that cool, that's something I could work with, but I never thought about a radio show. I had been doing videos on YouTube, reviewing software instruments and VSTs and those kinds of things, and I also started interviewing composers, and just talking about projects. And I started, I started having PR contacts. It's like, this is weird. Like, there's a whole other world that I hadn't known. And then this is like, whoa, okay, this is really cool.
Yeah.
So, composers, promoting their projects and talking about them. And I was introduced to that world, and that was great. And I felt a comfort in speaking to another human about something we both love. Mm-hmm. And something we both, at least I was trying to do it, something that they had done in a successful manner at that point. And so doing all these things meant that I had some material out in the world that said I can talk on a microphone to a camera sometimes.
Yeah.
But, in the radio world, I can talk to a microphone to an audience that I don't see, mm-hmm. which means the recording booth is your stage. Great. So that was happening. And then I was doing a lot of performance poetry and, being very comfortable on a microphone and speaking to people. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I was looking for work, and ABC Classic had a presenter role going for one of their other shows. And I applied for it. Didn't get it. No one got it, apparently. But 2.5 years later, I get an email, and they're like, we're looking at a video game music show, and you had a resume that was full of video game music stuff, including my last year at university. I did a 10,000 word research project on the music of Assassin's Creed 2.
Oh, sweet.
in a music course that was focused on Western art music, where like even interactive media music wasn't part of the deal. So, but thankfully I had a supervisor that was very kind of supportive and
nice.
Very proud of his of his students kind of pursuing things that they want to do.
Nice. And
that conversation happened. So they're like, they even get me in, and we start talking about it for an hour. They're like, oh, hope you're not thinking that we're just trying to drain a lot of knowledge out of you, and then we'll kind of pull the rug out of you. It's like, in an hour you can't possibly get all that I have to say on video game music, or all that video game music has to say.
Right.
So it's like, so don't worry. Like, I will talk freely about. You could just, if someone says, "Hey, come and talk with me for a couple of hours about video game music once a week," I'll do it. You don't even have to pay me to do that. That's just my life at this point.
Yeah.
So we start doing the radio show, and at that point, I feel a lot of trust from their end, from the producers and the other presenters. It's like, I haven't done this. Why do you think I could do this? But it's like they had seen that I had done something of the sort. So they're like, yeah, we know you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
Like you have demonstrated, you have demonstrable experience about this. So we started doing it, and here we are 4.5 years later.
Yeah.
It's very exciting because what excites me, one of the things that excites me the most is people who don't play video games who then discover video game music.
Right.
And I think that's been one of the most exciting things about doing the show, and just about my journey with video game music in general. I listen to a lot of game soundtracks for games I haven't played.
Oh, yeah.
Because they can exist outside of that context and stand alone beautifully. Like, I knew the whole Journey soundtrack before I played Journey, you know?
Yeah.
And it's... when people can kind of, like, experience that, and even when they hear on the show, I love that when we contextualize a story, it's very similar to a concert program. It's like, you know, if you're giving background to Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique, it's like, you don't necessarily have that whole tale in the back of your head unless someone tells you.
Right.
Like, unless someone tells you that this is what happened and this is what led to this composition and this is what he's trying to illustrate.
Yeah.
So I think that's always really interesting. And it's the same with film music, because film and TV music, I love a lot of things I haven't watched. But and music can uniquely stand outside of the medium of a visual medium, and be consumed on its own as its own experience. And I think that's just very exciting to me.
Yeah. So do you make the show there in your studio? Do you go to their studios? How do you assemble it?
Oh, we do it at the ABC studios.
Okay.
Though, to be fair, during the pandemic times, there was a year where it was all happening from within my studio.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, because I just remember, it's like, oh, if you ever need me to record from home, I can do it. And this is way pre-pandemic.
Yep.
So, so when it came time to it, I get the calls like, can you do it from the studio? Because we don't really want anyone coming in right now. And so some people had to kind of like scramble and make up a setup. I already had the setup. So I was like, cool, I'm set.
Yeah. Same thing happened to me when all that happened.
I don't think anyone could notice. Sorry.
The same thing happened to me when we were told, okay, you can't come to the school. Because at the time I was working for the jazz station in town, which was in a high school. And so when they shut down the high schools, we weren't allowed to go in. But because I had been doing the podcast at home, I had a setup. So it made it a little easier, but it wasn't quite as professional as what you've got going on.
No, I don't think it's. I think it's the same. You're seeing my wife's setup behind me.
Oh,
because we share a studio.
Well, what does she do?
We share a studio. She's a composer.
Oh, cool.
We met at music school. We met studying music, studying composition, and then kind of like here we are now, like sharing a studio. And she does. It's funny because she does a bit of film music and I do video game music, and then sometimes we'll swap. But
funny.
It's really fun. It's really fun.
Yeah, no kidding.
I will say though, like the thing about starting to do the show is I then started to kind of think of people like Emily Reese, who have really pioneered this this art form in the mainstream. If I don't know how to describe it, because when I say, I present video game music on the radio, it's like, that is so niche. I'm like, well, here's the godmother of niche, Emily Reese. So, I'm going to flip the interview on you now.
Oh, dear. Okay. All right. We'll see how good I can deflect it back. But go ahead.
You weren't ready for this, were you?
Not usually, no.
No, so, because I came across, your stuff on Top Score, I think
Yeah.
back in 2011, 2012. Had you been doing it far before that?
No, 2011 is when that show started. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So it started early, I think like February or something like that was the first maybe interview, or maybe March or something like that. And then I think April 2011, I think. I'd have to go look at the archive, but yeah, that's when that was.
Oh, so I caught you like in the early days.
Yeah, you did right away. Yeah. So it's been 12 years now. I mean, it's so different now than what it was then. And even then, when I was at Minnesota Public Radio, the show went through many different changes, that were asked of, whatever, to fit the format or to whatever. So it was very different a number of times through my time there.
Yeah.
And just now it's just a totally different show, I think. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, same subject, right? But
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Had anyone else been really doing that before?
Not to my knowledge. There were
I
podcasts that covered, I know there were some chiptunes podcasts and some 8-bit focused podcasts. I don't know that there were any modern video game music podcasts at the time.
Interesting.
And
Because
certainly no radio shows. No radio shows.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think that's the thing for me when I started the show is I was listening to internet radio where they played video game music, and I just be off on a part-time job, and I just put on in the background, and I get excited. It's like, oh, my favorite artist is coming on. Oh, my favorite soundtrack is coming on, and thinking how cool it would be one day to hear video game music on mainstream radio.
Yeah.
Little did I know this. Someone somewhere was saying, it's like, you want to hear that? You're gonna have to do it.
Exactly. I mean, the way I thought about it then, and still do now in a lot of ways, is that radio, especially, like any industry, has a personality to it. And radio tends to be just a little slow in catching up to what else is happening in media. Like I feel like public radio in particular, it was like really difficult to like drag them into the digital age, And so there was
because there's a big... Sorry, continue.
Oh, not at all. I was just going to say, it was like we met nothing but resistance. Nothing but resistance the whole time. So, I mean, there's stories that I can't talk about, but it was a constant struggle to make, which you can't make anyone understand anything ever, but to try to illuminate the art, right? And to be like, listen, I all day Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, all day.
Yeah,
but
absolutely, yeah, right.
But I also love rock and soul and R&B and rap, and I love jazz, and I love video game music, and all of these have a place in the world of music, and all of these deserve to be revered. So it was just a constant struggle. That's the only way I can describe it. Really,
I think it's really interesting because the lucky thing is there's not a lot of detractors in this day and age.
Yeah,
there are still people who are vocal about video game music doesn't belong in classical radio, and especially like when it's called ABC Classic, it's like it invites that idea of, and it just then opens up the idea of like, okay, if we're really going to have this conversation and we're going to define what classical means, and then if you mean anything until 1750 and everything after 1750 isn't allowed, then that opens up some holes in your love of Tchaikovsky and Mahler, and then it's like, okay, we're going to start talking about the John Cage of it, or the Takemitsu of it, or the Charles Ives. Are we going to talk about that? If you have no objection to that, then this is all a logical conclusion.
Right.
In fact, I one of the things I love to do is be on classical radio and say, oh, this soundtrack is by this video game composer, And it has this hip-hop producer on board who you might have heard on Kendrick Lamar's record. You know? And here's Kendrick Lamar. So the producer for Kendrick Lamar and the composer for TV's Daredevil both making a Spider-Man game. The music for a Spider-Man game. It's like, okay, let's... and it's like, I don't think there needs to be an apology for that.
No.
And I say that now with the privilege of, you know, of people like you having paved the way beforehand. And potentially it could, for all I know, the backstory could be that someone at ABC Classic is like, oh, we've listened to Emily Reese and we like what Emily Reese has done, or we like what Jessica Curry has been doing, or we like what these people have been doing, and we need to do our own version. I don't know. I'm not privy to that part of the conversation.
Who cares how? Just glad it happened, yeah.
But I have to imagine that it wouldn't have been, it would have been at least different had it not been for the Emily Reese edits.
Wow, yeah. I mean, I don't think I'm egotistical enough to even entertain that thought, but I just, I mean, maybe.
And that's why we love you.
I think, you know, I wish... Yeah, that's a different conversation for a different time. But I am so grateful that I got to do it, because I do feel like it did open doors for other people to do it, you know, not only in the U.S., but, you know, in the U.K. with Jessica Curry and you in Australia. I mean, it's awesome to know that happened. And I'm so grateful that someone somewhere gave it a chance, you know?
Absolutely. And I think one of the fun things that happened at the beginning of the process is in that first conversation they were having with me, they were like, oh, so, you know, we're trying to understand the video game medium and demographic and whatnot. Is it heavily male focused? I'm like, in a way, yes, in a way, no.
Depends. But, it just depends.
Well, yeah. There might be some people who are screaming, it's like, oh, this is a place that entertains these ideas and these very gendered thoughts. And it's just like, okay, but no, really, because I'm fairly sure it's evenly distributed, and depending on your definition if your definition of gaming is Call of Duty and Halo and nothing else, then maybe there's even that. I don't know if there's truth to that, but maybe there is a truth to that thought if that's the limit of your scope.
Yeah.
But if you talk about gaming as an industry, as a global phenomenon, it has no restrictions on these things. And I love that things are becoming more in the open. Like a lot more conversation is happening around what video games are and what they mean. And it occurred to me that a lot of the people that I had heard doing video game radio were not men.
Oh yeah.
At that point.
Right.
Like I felt like the anomaly. I was like, I'm the one stepping into a world that isn't mine at this point. It's like I'm the one who's like should be stepping aside.
Oh yeah, wow. Yeah, I didn't even think of that. No, I'm glad that you're doing it there, and just, you know, for those listening, you can find the shows all online. Just search for Meena Game Show Australia Broadcasting Company or Meena Game Show ABC. Make sure you put Meena's name in, then you'll find it right away. And I love all the themes too. And so I'm just, you know, like you had like you've already done a best of 2022 so far. I'm like, good Lord, all I have is like a Google Doc with a few games on it, you know, and you've done like a whole show on it already. Best video game music of 2022. So let's just wrap on that for a half a minute. What are some of your favorite scores? Because I looked at your list. Yeah.
So this is biased because I A, love the game so much, and B, also now at this point know the people who have made the music. Horizon Forbidden West.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely love it. But I also, what I recognized as we were playing, my wife and I were playing the second game, is Horizon seems to be like a take or an offshoot of the idea of Assassin's Creed. Not that it's like we want to make an Assassin's Creed, but you know, disguise it. But it's like it shares a lot of the same DNA in the most positive way, and musically it does as well. Because the idea of why I love Assassin's Creed is that it explores culture and modern textures. And it's not actually most of the Assassin's Creed scores are not symphonic; they're not orchestral.
Right.
And that's kind of what's really interesting about them. It's like, how do we take this Greek instrument and fuse it in with some electronics, and then maybe you'll hear a choir if you're lucky.
Yeah.
But like, it's going to be a whole lot of awesome experiments before you reach there. And so when I started hearing the music for Horizon, that's not orchestral. It's like there's a small string section, but there's all these different explorations of instruments from different cultures and textures, and deliberately played not to sound like a culture as well.
Right.
That's part of the impetus. But then you have the voice of Julie Elvin, and I love Julie. I love Julie as a human. We've become good friends at this point. And,
oh, how nice. Yeah.
And it's just as a human, and then also like before that as a talent. It's like, oh God, yes, the themes, the Aloy's theme forever, and then like what the Flights have been doing, and I love the Flights.
Yeah,
I love like what
composing
they've done around.
Duo. Yeah,
absolutely, yeah. Joe Henson, Alexis Smith, and what they do is the way they produce their stuff. So this is me very biased. Around why I love Horizon and why I think it's one of my favorite scores of 2022.
Yeah.
That being said, now I have to revisit the list. I'm always intrigued by the ways culture is explored in video games and culture is engaged with. By nature, I love doing that for Old World, and even now I'm working on composing a video game. That is around Indigenous Australian culture with First Nations musicians. And so I'm the non-Indigenous composer working with a culture outside of my own. So the idea of how do you honor that, and how do you also keep it creative, and how do you still compose?
Yeah.
That whole thing is so fascinating to me.
Yeah, very.
And I'm very grateful for that. So the game's called Enchanted, just a side plug.
Oh, cool. No, I'm so glad. Yeah.
In I-double-N chanted. It's a pun, yes.
Okay.
And the game is full of puns.
And it comes out, when does it come out?
No, I have no release date at this point.
Okay.
But I am wrapping up the score. So
okay, cool.
That's all I can say. At this point of recording,
Sure.
I'm wrapping up the score.
Beautiful. All right, beautiful.
And then the developers will listen back and be like, are you wrapping up the score? Like, are you sure you were telling the truth on that? Yes.
Yeah.
So this idea of exploring culture has been really interesting. So games like Sifu, Howie Lee, and what he did with, like, he's an electronic musician, but who applied these processing and remixing techniques to Chinese traditional instruments and representing elements of Chinese culture, like those 5 elements that are represented in the game are being mirrored in the music.
Cool.
Which is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then things like Ghostwire Tokyo, which is also exploring the relationship between modern Japan and cultural traditional Japan through the music, also including lullabies and poets and literature figures from the first half of the 20th century. Like, that is just phenomenal with what they're doing. So to me, those are the things that I'm drawn to. My God, Trek to Yomi with Cody Matthew Johnson and Yoko Honda.
Yes.
Amazing. And the fact that it's authentically instruments of the period, even though it's a supernatural premise that doesn't need it, I find that incredible. And how these elements of culture and history are very relevant in 2022. Are very relevant and can be explored. Like, they're not relics of history. And this is where one of the ways I find the extreme value of video game music and film music, but the focus here is the ways that video games can explore history and culture through a modern lens, but also bring focus to these things that we maybe forget about as a collective. But now I have to think of. I mean, Elden Ring is ridiculous, and Yuka Kitamura all day. all day.
All day.
All day.
All day.
But I feel like that's an extension to the Dark Souls worlds. It's like, it's an extension sonically as well. It's not like, so I think of that not as a 2022 thing, but as a From Software thing.
Sure.
With the one exception of that 2018 game they did, Deracine, which was like super chill and chambered. It's a VR game.
Okay.
We literally just played it on the latest episode of the show, so that will date the recording. But you can take that out. Deracine, it's a VR game where Miyazaki was trying to explore. It's a meta commentary on the existence and non-existence of VR, and it's so chill. Like there are elements of suspense and everything, but it's not Dark Souls. It's not Bloodborne. It's the other side. It's the B side of the LP, so to speak. If that's, did I say that right? The B side of the LP, because I've never done vinyl.
Well, there's only two sides, so yeah.
I know, because I think of that in cassettes, but I don't actually.
Oh yeah.
I recognize that. Am I saying the B-sides thing in the correct context?
Yes.
In the way that someone's like, oh, it's like hummus? Is that how you say it? That's what it feels like to me right now. It's like,
no, you nailed it. You nailed it. Yeah.
So that's just what draws me in. But that's like what has remained in my memory because of my own bias.
Well, and that's the best part of it, is that there's so many amazing, wonderful choices, right? I mean, there's so much good music constantly just coming out in games, so it's fantastic. But let's move on from music and talk just briefly about slam poetry, a world that I know very little about, other than just what people know about slam poetry, I guess. How did that start for you? And when you write poetry, are you writing in English? Are you writing in Arabic? Are you doing both? Talk to me, because Arabic is such a beautiful language, in poetry especially.
Linguistically, yes.
Arabic poetry is to die for.
See, I do not write in Arabic because my favorite poet is Gibran Khalil Gibran.
Okay.
The author of The Prophets. And sorry, but people say Khalil Gibran. It's like Gibran Khalil Gibran. Again, I have like another thing. So I read he wrote in English and Arabic. So when I read his Arabic poetry, I'm completely dwarfed. I'm like, I'm not even gonna try right now. I'm gonna practice for a long time before I do this.
Yeah.
That being said, I have done creative writing in Arabic throughout my life.
Sure.
But he's just on another level.
Yeah.
But my own journey, my first ever encounter with slam poetry, or just spoken word poetry, performance poetry, because sometimes people think of slam poetry as a very specific genre, whereas it's a medium of competition. It's not actually a genre of poetry.
Okay, gotcha.
Because there is this thing from Parks and Rec where Leslie Knope is like, anything can be a slam poem if you say it like this, or what was it from 22 Jump Streets, Jonah Hill. I think that's the context where a lot of people think about. It's like Cynthia, right? And that's the context a lot of people have. But for me, it actually started with hip hop.
Okay.
Because I love hip hop.
Oh yeah.
And I was in the early days of Kanye, I was really into his records and into the rappers he worked with. And, especially I also love John Legend. John Legend is one of my favorite artists. So all through that Kanye connection.
Yeah.
But there was a Kanye song called Never Let Me Down, which sampled Chaka Khan's vocals, but also it had Jay Ivy on it. And it was this third verse that was rap, quote unquote rap, but not rap. I'm like, I did not know what that was. And I was just I really loved that song. So I listened, I went on YouTube. This is around 2007. I'm a 20-year-old at this point, and I'm looking for the music video that might possibly exist for this song. So Never Let Me Down, music video. And I come across Jay Ivy, Never Let Me Down. I was like, what? And it's the guy on stage to an audience. I click on it, and that's the first thing I ever see. And it's Jay Ivy doing his verse from that song as a performance poem, as a slam poem.
Okay.
And I was like, I have no idea what this is, but I love it. This is not rapping. It's poetic, but it's got some cadences of rap of the stuff that I enjoyed, and it's got some really awesome rhyme structures, but this is not what I was looking for, but I'm glad I found it. And I realized that was an upload from from Russell Simmons' Def Jam Poetry, which ran for 6 seasons.
Okay.
And I think the last season was the year that I had started looking at it. And I went down a rabbit hole of YouTube videos. And Def Jam Poetry, just looked up the word Def Jam Poetry, and saw poetry in a whole new light. It wasn't the thing that we studied at school. It's not that it's studying at school is a problem, but it was very strictly defined in terms of some certain poets, or here's a cryptic, here's 6 cryptic lines, and you have to contemplate on them for a day to understand what the author might have been saying, and you have to contextualize all these things. Whereas what I was finding with spoken word poetry is there was this raw emotionality that was on display, and it was very powerful. It was almost theater, but it wasn't. It was like theater, but with very real stories. I mean, not that theater doesn't have real stories, but these are just people telling these stories in very cool, awesome ways. And so I started experimenting with that. I'd already been writing hip hop and writing my own verses, but I'd been producing hip hop as well. So it was an interesting thing to have already been in that world,
right?
And then explore spoken word. And I started writing it, and showing it to a couple of friends, who had a bit of appreciation, but sometimes they were like, poetry. There'd be a face. There'd be a face. Face. Okay. Yeah. Okay, man. Whatever. Yeah, that sounds cool. Yeah. What the hell's wrong with that guy? It's just like, so it was that kind of vibe. But then I started looking for spoken word events around Australia, around where I was. And I was actually in another state at the time. Okay. And I was looking for the slam poetry competition. There was the Australian Poetry Slam, and there were competitions and heats that went to every state. So I decided to go. It's like, cool, I'm going to go. Took a couple of friends with me, one of whom was actually American, so she already knew what this was about. Sure. And then others who weren't American who were like, oh, this is completely new. But the friends that I was hanging out with a lot were like, yeah, no, we're not going to go. It's like, okay, fine, whatever. So I went. And I did, I performed. Actually, no, I'd been performing. I found a couple of venues in my home state, in the state that I was in. So I was starting to get into the scene and meet people around the scene. But this one specifically, the Australian Poetry Slam heat, I went into it and I got through to the state final, which was like, whoa, what? Okay, so we go to they fly me out to the state final. And this was in Queensland, and there I meet other people who have, been finalists in their states, and so I'm meeting some people who, little did I know, I would know for a long time in the scene. Okay. I would these are poets, and including people I then collaborated with quite a lot, and miraculously I got through that as well to the national final, and I shouldn't have. Because because the poet that's one of the poets that I ended up collaborating with, who's the Greek poet I talked about earlier, Luca Lesson. That was the night I met him, and the only reason he didn't make it through is he was losing points because he went to overtime because people were applauding his poem and interrupting it. Like he was just, his poem was so good.
Wow.
That, he had to stay there for like 20 to 30 seconds that he did not have in the competition rules. Try to talk over the applause.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So it's a really weird thing.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was studying something. I wasn't even studying music. I was doing another degree to get a quote-unquote real job, yada, yada, yada. And I was still, I was struggling with this idea of being an artist. And I'd had some resistance from my family at that point because, we don't want to see you not succeed. And this is incredibly tough. So understandably, but also, I'm going to do what I want. It's kind of like, it's like, you can't stop me. Which is probably, like, I could say that, I can laugh about it now, but it's a very different idea when you're going through it.
Yes.
And so I got to the national final, which was taking place at the Sydney Opera House.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, wait, I'm going to do spoken word poetry at the Sydney Opera House? Is this really happening right now?
That's incredible, yeah.
It was ridiculous. And it was, I think at that point, my parents kind of had this thing of, oh, you could succeed at this, And it was the year after that I started studying music and everything. So, I didn't win the national slam, but that became kind of me being part of the spoken word scene in Australia, and subsequently in other parts outside of Australia, which was really fun. But it was also the thing that said to me, you be an artist. Like, there is a place for you out there. Because it was coming to me at a time where I was just like really lost with myself and I didn't know. And then there was enough people who responded to something I did that said, which isn't me like looking for validation, but in terms of what I was going through at the time, it's like, there needed to be something outside of me that said you can do this not as a career but as a life, because I sometimes hate to think of art as a career, even though it is,
right,
but it's because it's a life that you choose, with all its challenges and also all its blessings. It's and that was kind of what pushed me into it. And the next year, I started studying composition, and I was doing spoken word, and
cool.
just the two were kind of growing side by side.
Sure.
And I was collaborating with poets as a musician and as a poet.
Cool. Yeah.
It started every now and then we'd start doing group pieces where we'd 2 or 3 of us on stage and perform together, and it was just it's almost like being in a musical ensemble.
Right. No, of course.
But the rhythms are a little looser, but maybe this is like, being in an ensemble where you're exploring things that are a bit rubato or a bit arrhythmic, but they still have their own rhythm.
Yeah.
And what I found that it was that spoken word as well was helping me explore things outside of the musical constructs that I had grown up with. Even though I did have other, I felt like I was still had constructs that were really cool, but I could start exploring the idea of rhythm with rhythms within rhythms and odd meters as functions of speech.
Sure.
Because with hip hop, or with a lot of hip hop, you're doing things to a 4/4 grid, and then you're kind of going in and out of it, but at the backbone is a 4/4 kind of beat. Again, not always the case, but with this, I was the backbone. So I could speak in certain rhythms and things that felt like they could go on, for 6 beats, and then things that go on for 8 beats, and then things that go on for 3 beats, very naturally. And that's when I kind of learned more about speech. And I would say that then plays into radio.
Oh, for sure.
Because you start to kind of develop a voice on a microphone, or a voice. I mean, with radio, I'm still trying to be myself. Yeah. But when you're on stage, I started doing emceeing, started MC gigs, just be host them, and present people, and I just really love that as well.
Yeah, yeah.
But you can kind of play within the, I'm now putting on a voice. I'm going to perform for you right now.
Yeah.
And I'm on the radio with Emily Reese, and she's looking at me with belief in her eyes. I can start doing that. And then I can start just having a conversation with the audience. And so all these things, they all play into each other for me, and I just find that incredible.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when I think of, people who are improvising poetry on the spot,
which I don't do, by the way.
Oh, you don't?
That's an incredible skill set that I do not have.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole different level. But even just collaborating with people on stage with spoken word is very free jazz to me. I think of free jazz because there are constructs and there are limitations to each actor in the group.
Yeah.
But there really aren't limitations, right? The successful group will be listening to each other and playing off of each other, but also within this completely free, no meter, no key, no,
Which can also be kind of similar to a theatrical experience, to performing, because the spoken word that I do is always written out. Like I've written it out and I've memorized it. So it's almost like being an actor on stage. And
it's 100%.
Yeah, and it's just like and now because I'm in a tour in a play where I'm playing the piano in the play, but I'm observing other actors and what they're doing with their characters and how they respond to each other and how they stretch it and how they change it with each run. And it's so interesting. It's a relationship to text that you have, and how do you play with it?
Yeah.
And you don't always perform the same poem the same way twice.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
It's sometimes it's your state of mind at the time that's playing into how you're emoting or how you're not emoting, which is its own version of emoting.
Right. Exactly.
It's super. And I think it's also this really interesting thing of how real are you being versus how performative are you being, and what do you actually need? And I don't use performative in the negative way that's like, it's performative activism. No, it's like what affectations are you applying and for what purpose? And because it could be comedic. Yeah. And just like video games and video game music, spoken word poetry is a realm of exploring so many things. Like because I used to grow up with this idea that music, all songs had to be love songs, because the songs that I heard were all like, oh, I like you and I want to be with you, or I hate you because we were together. And it's like, then I started kind of understanding that there was a lot more to songwriting than this topic. It's a powerful topic because human relationships are important, but there's so many things to be talking about. Yeah. And in the same way, spoken word. In the same way, video games. People think of video games as, they might think of them as 2 or 3 games or archetypes, and that's what it means. There's so much you can explore. And that's one of those things that I learned even more throughout doing the radio show, and exploring all these different soundtracks from indie games and AAA and things that are non-combat based and things that are like completely exploratory versus things that are like roguelikes and all these different genres. You just it explodes. And that's with spoken word poetry. Yes, there are some what's the word? Mainstream hallmarks. But
sure, yeah.
To focus on that as the entire art form is so limiting. Yeah. And it's just so interesting to hear. And this is why I love doing spoken word workshops, is like people who are developing their crafts. Is I love hearing that very unique thing that you have to offer that I could never think of. I just want to hear that coming out of you. And this is just all across all art. But anyway, tangent on tangent on tangent.
Well, is there a way, are there videos of you online doing this?
I do have a YouTube channel where I have uploaded a few. I've got uploads from other channels and my own uploads.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Probably nothing that recent, but
well, no, just to get a sense for what it's like? And
yeah, just look up my
that?
name on YouTube. You'll find something.
Okay, cool. Well, I mean, Meena, there's so many fun things to explore with you, and I'm so glad we connected randomly on Twitter. I don't even remember how that happened. I don't even. Somebody tweeted something and favorited it, and that was how that was.
Oh, really?
I don't remember. Do you remember?
Well, for me, all I saw was Emily level with Emily's following you. I'm like, what? What? Because I'd already been following you. And I'm like, why? Why is she slipped up, right? This is a mistake, right? It's just like, and then I just messaged like, oh my God, it's you. It's like,
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know how you got there then. Like, I don't know how you got to the point.
you know, it's funny, like on Twitter, I don't care what other Twitter users do, but personally for me, if someone follows me, I want to follow them back. And
Gotcha.
I know that some people are like, absolutely not. Some people are like, every single time. And so if I see someone, my assumption, I'll have to look now, is that maybe you favorited something. Maybe I like released a show or something and you gave it a little heart, or maybe something. Yeah. And then I probably looked at you and and it probably said Meena Shamaly follows you. And I was like, oh. And then, so yeah, I mean, and then I just,
there you go.
You know, I listened to some of your radio shows, and I mean, yeah, that's how that happened.
Oh, that's awesome.
But yeah, I mean, it was a fun connection to make, and I'm grateful for it. And,
absolutely.
We'll talk again when Enchanted comes out, hopefully. I'm just going to assume that's going to happen in 2023. Who knows? We'll figure it out.
I think my own personal thing is I'm hoping it's 2022, but I can't make that decision. I'm not making. This is not this is not an official statement.
Right. Yes. No. Of course. But do please, we'll keep in touch and all of that stuff. Yeah. But loved the work on the Christopher Tin tracks. Just absolutely beautiful voice and yeah, we'll talk again. So thank you so much for chatting with me today.
My absolute pleasure.